Power has a way of protecting its own. A nod between judges, a wink between officers, files that disappear, evidence that never existed. It's a dance Maya Caldwell has watched for years from behind her federal prosecutor's desk, each step choreographed, to maintain the illusion of justice while serving something far darker. Until tonight. Two police officers see a black woman in a luxury car and decide she doesn't belong. They don't know she's a federal prosecutor. She doesn't tell them. Because Maya understands something they don't. Sometimes the most dangerous person in a corrupt system isn't the one fighting it from the outside. It's the one who lets herself be swallowed whole, just to expose the rot within. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The clock on Maya Caldwell's dashboard read 11:42 p.m. as she navigated her silver Mercedes through the quiet streets of downtown. Her shoulders ached from hunching over case files all day, and her blazer lay discarded in the passenger seat, leaving her in a simple black tank top. The late September air carried just enough chill to keep her alert as it drifted through the cracked window. The streetlights cast long shadows across the empty sidewalks, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere in the normally bustling city center. Maya adjusted the air conditioning, letting out a long breath as she thought about the mountain of work still waiting for her at the office tomorrow. The Thompson case had consumed most of her week, a complex federal prosecution that required her full attention. But tonight, all she wanted was the comfort of her own bed and maybe a glass of wine to help her unwind. The radio played softly in the background, some late-night jazz program that helped ease the tension in her neck. She'd been in the office since 6 that morning, poring over depositions and witness statements. Even now, her mind kept drifting back to key points she needed to address in tomorrow's briefing. Just 15 more minutes, she muttered to herself, fighting back a yawn. Her apartment wasn't far now, and she could already imagine kicking off her heels and sinking into a hot bath. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, making the drive peaceful despite her exhaustion. 2 blocks ahead, Officers Thomas Grayson and Michael Langley sat in their patrol car, the engine idling. Grayson's coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he still nursed it, more out of habit than thirst. The cardboard cup was crumpled at the edges, bearing the logo of the diner where they'd spent their dinner break trading stories about recent arrests. Langley drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, scanning the nearly empty streets with predatory focus. He'd been on the force for 12 years, and nights like these, quiet, with just enough chill in the air to keep people indoors, were his favorite for finding suspicious activity. The precinct's unofficial quota system meant they needed at least 2 more stops before their shift ended. "Check out the Benz," Langley said suddenly, straightening in his seat as Maya's car passed them. The red brake lights flared briefly at the intersection before continuing on. His eyes narrowed as he watched the luxury vehicle glide past, taking in the driver's appearance in the brief moment she was illuminated by the streetlight. Grayson's lips curled into a smirk. Awful late for someone to be cruising through this neighborhood. He didn't need to say more. They both knew what he meant. This wasn't the sort of area where they expected to see luxury cars, especially not driven by black women at this hour. It was the kind of profiling they'd perfected over years of partnership, the kind that never made it into official reports but filled their arrest quotas. Let's see what she's up to. Langley pulled out smoothly, keeping a careful distance as they followed Maya's car. They trailed her for 3 blocks, watching as she signaled each turn, maintained perfect speed, and gave them absolutely no legitimate reason to stop her. But they didn't need a legitimate reason. They rarely did. Maya noticed the patrol car in her rearview mirror, but kept her breathing steady. She'd been here before. The familiar dance of being followed by police, waiting to see if they'd manufacture a reason to pull her over. Her hands stayed firmly at 10, and 2 on the steering wheel, her speed exactly at the limit. Years of experience had taught her the rules of this particular game, though her position as a U.S. attorney usually spared her from the worst of it. The flash of red and blue lights shattered the quiet night. Maya's heart sank, but she didn't hesitate. She signaled and pulled over immediately, positioning her car perfectly against the curb. As she reached for her registration in the glove compartment, She noticed her hands weren't shaking. She wasn't afraid. She was angry. But she'd learned long ago that showing anger to police officers was a luxury she couldn't afford. The interior light illuminated her face as she retrieved her documents, highlighting the exhaustion in her eyes. She'd spent countless hours in courtrooms arguing cases, facing down hardened criminals and corrupt officials. But this simple act of being pulled over, still made her stomach knot with a mixture of rage and resignation. Officer Langley approached her window, his flashlight beam deliberately aimed at her face. Officer Grayson hung back slightly, his hand resting casually on his holster, a subtle threat that wasn't lost on Maya. She squinted against the harsh light but kept her expression neutral, years of courtroom experience helping her maintain composure. "License and registration," Langley barked, not bothering with any preamble. His tone carried the weight of authority he'd grown accustomed to wielding like a weapon. The beam of his flashlight moved deliberately across the car's interior, searching for any excuse to escalate the situation. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" Maya's voice was steady, professional, the same tone she used in courtrooms across the country. Not that they knew that. To them, she was just another target, another opportunity to exercise their power without consequence. "You rolled through the stop sign back there." Langley's tone dripped with smug authority. The lie came easily to him, practiced and polished through countless similar stops. "Did you have anything to drink tonight?" Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She could smell the stale coffee on his breath as he leaned closer to her window, invading her space with practiced intimidation. "No, sir, and I came to a complete stop at every intersection." She kept her voice level, despite knowing that challenging their version of events would only make things worse. "That's not what we saw." Grayson stepped closer, his flashlight joining. Langley's in what was becoming an impromptu interrogation. The combined beams created harsh shadows across Maya's face, a calculated tactic designed to disorient and intimidate. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "I don't consent to leaving my vehicle without probable cause." Maya knew her rights. She'd defended them countless times for others. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter, the leather creaking softly under her hands. But knowledge of the law provided little protection when facing officers who chose to ignore it. Langley's face hardened, the friendly facade dropping completely. "I said step out of the vehicle. Now!" His hand moved to his belt, a subtle threat that wasn't lost on Maya. The streetlight caught his badge, number 6147, and she committed it to memory, along with every other detail of this encounter. She weighed her options quickly. This situation was escalating exactly as she'd seen happen to so many others. But unlike most people in this position, she knew exactly what was happening, and exactly how to document it. Her phone sat in the center console, and as she reached for her seatbelt, she pressed the small button that would start recording audio. "I smell marijuana coming from the vehicle," Grayson announced loudly, though Maya knew there wasn't any. She hadn't even been in the same room as marijuana in years. The false claim was just another tool in their arsenal, one she'd seen used countless times in cases she'd reviewed. "That's impossible, officer. I don't use drugs." Maya kept her voice level, even as she recognized the familiar pattern. First, the traffic violation that didn't happen, then the alleged smell of drugs to justify a search. She'd seen this exact scenario play out in dozens of complaint files that had crossed her desk. Hands where we can see them. Langley grabbed her wrist roughly as she stepped out, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. The sudden pain shot through her arm, but Maya bit back a cry. She knew that any sound of distress would be logged as resisting arrest in their report. The night air felt colder now as she stood exposed on the street, her tank top offering little protection against the chill. The concrete was rough under her feet, and she could feel small pieces of gravel through her thin-soled work shoes. Every sensation, every detail burned itself into her memory. A few yards away, a young man had stopped on the sidewalk, his phone raised to record the scene. He looked to be in his early 20s, wearing a hoodie and jeans, his face illuminated by the blue light of his phone screen. Grayson noticed him, immediately his head snapping toward the potential witness. "Move along," he shouted, taking a threatening step toward the bystander. His hand shifted to his holster again, a movement that carried clear implications. "This is police business. You interfere, you're going to jail too." The man hesitated, his phone still raised, moral obligation warring with self-preservation. But when Grayson started walking toward him with purposeful strides, the decision was made for him. He quickly backed away and disappeared around the corner, leaving Maya alone with her captors. "She's trying to run," Langley suddenly shouted, though Maya hadn't moved an inch. The false accusation echoed off the empty buildings, and before she could protest, both officers had her pinned against the car, her cheek pressed against the cold metal of her own vehicle. The rough treatment was calculated, designed to provoke a reaction they could use to justify further force. Maya had seen it before in countless case files, the escalation of force followed by claims of resistance that never actually occurred. "I am not resisting," Maya stated clearly, knowing her phone was still recording in her pocket. "I am complying with all orders. You have no probable cause for this detention." Her words were chosen carefully, laying groundwork for the legal battle she knew would follow. "Shut up!" Langley's grip tightened painfully on her wrist as he roughly cuffed her hands behind her back. The metal was cold and too tight, cutting into her skin. "You lawyer types think you know everything." The words were spat out with contempt, born of countless encounters with citizens who dared to know their rights. Maya's ears perked up at that. She hadn't mentioned being a lawyer. They were profiling her based on her car, her appearance, and probably her well-spoken manner. Every detail would matter later when she built her case against them. Their own prejudices were revealing themselves in ways they didn't even realize. Grayson was already on his radio, his voice carrying the practiced casualness of someone who'd done this many times before. "Dispatch, we need a tow truck at our location. Got a possible stolen vehicle here." The lie was so casual, so practiced, that Maya wondered how many other innocent people had their cars impounded based on similar false reports. She watched as he walked around her car, shining his flashlight through the windows as if searching for evidence to support his false claim. The beam lingered on her discarded blazer, her briefcase in the back seat, all the trappings of a successful professional that somehow made her more suspicious in their eyes. As they roughly guided her toward the patrol car, Maya caught her reflection in her car's window. Her tank top was wrinkled now, her naturally coily hair slightly disheveled from the rough handling. A small scrape on her cheek had started to redden where they'd pressed her against the car. She looked vulnerable, exactly how they wanted her to look. But beneath the surface, her mind was cataloging every violation, every abuse of power, every moment that would soon come back to haunt these officers. Through the window, she watched as a tow truck arrived with suspicious speed, suggesting this was a regular arrangement. The driver didn't even look at her car's registration or ask any questions before hooking it up, another piece of evidence for the pattern she was building in her mind. The fluorescent lights of the precinct's booking area cast harsh shadows across Maya's face as Officer Langley pushed her through the metal doors. The clock on the wall read 12:17 a.m., but time had taken on a strange elastic quality since her arrest. The familiar rush of cold air conditioning hit her bare arms, raising goosebumps on her skin. "Name?" barked the booking sergeant, a heavy-set man with thinning gray hair, and a nameplate reading Wilson. He barely looked up from his computer screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard with practiced indifference. "Maya Caldwell," she responded clearly, keeping her voice steady despite the growing ache in her shoulders from the too tight handcuffs. Her wrists were starting to show red marks where the metal bit into her skin. Officer Grayson stood nearby, filling out his arrest report with quick practice strokes. Maya caught glimpses of his writing: combative, uncooperative, suspected, intoxication. Each lie added to the growing knot of anger in her stomach, but she kept her expression neutral. "Empty your pockets," Sergeant Wilson commanded. "Remove all jewelry and accessories." He pushed a small plastic bin across the counter. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she removed her mother's sapphire ring, a law school graduation gift she'd worn every day for the past 8 years. Next came her watch, a delicate silver piece that had timed countless legal arguments. Each item felt like a piece of her identity being stripped away. "My phone," she said quietly, reaching for the device that had recorded everything. "It needs to be handed over," Langley interrupted, snatching the phone before she could finish. He powered it off immediately, a move Maya knew was calculated to prevent any further recording. What he didn't know was that the audio had already automatically uploaded to her secure cloud storage. The booking process continued with mechanical efficiency. Fingerprints pressed into ink, then paper. The flash of a camera documenting her disheveled appearance. Height measurement, weight recorded, identifying marks noted. With each step, Maya felt herself being reduced to a series of numbers and checkboxes in their system. "I want to make my phone call," Maya stated firmly as Wilson began filling out the property receipt. "I have the right to contact my attorney." Wilson exchanged a look with Langley, the kind of silent communication that spoke volumes about the system's casual disregard for prisoners' rights. "Phones are down for maintenance," Wilson replied, not even trying to make the lie sound convincing. "You can make your call when they're back up." Maya knew this tactic well. She'd heard about it from countless defendants. Delay the phone call, isolate the accused, hope they'll break down or accept a quick plea deal just to get out. But they'd never face someone who knew their playbook by heart. "I need you to document that I requested my phone call at 12:23 a.m., she said, her eyes fixed on Wilson's computer screen where the time was clearly displayed. "And that it was denied due to alleged technical issues." Wilson's fingers paused over the keyboard. Something in her tone, too knowledgeable, too precise, made him look up and really see her for the first time. But the moment passed, and he returned to his practiced indifference. "Take her to holding," he grunted to a young officer who had been hovering nearby. "Cell 3. The holding cells were located down a narrow corridor that smelled of industrial, cleaner and stale sweat. Maya's shoes clicked against the concrete floor, the sound echoing off the institutional green walls. As they approached the cells, she could hear voices, other detainees waiting in limbo, their fates suspended in the slow machinery of justice. Cell 3 was already occupied. 2 women sat on the metal bench that ran along the back wall while a third paced the small space restlessly. They looked up as the door clanged open, taking in Maya's business-casual attire with varying degrees of interest. "Welcome to the party," said the woman who had been pacing. She was young, maybe early 20s, with intricate braids pulled back in a ponytail. "I'm Tasha. Been here since dinner time because Officer Friendly out there decided my taillight was broken. Spoiler alert, it wasn't." Maya sat down on the empty end of the bench, careful to maintain her composure. "How long have they been telling you the phones are down?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Going on 6 hours now," replied one of the other women, an older lady wearing hospital scrubs. "I'm Sandra. Apparently, I ran a stop sign on my way home from my shift. Funny thing is, there aren't any stop signs on my route home." The third woman, who introduced herself as Denise, had a similar story. Pulled over for suspicious behavior, which amounted to driving her own car through what the officers decided was the wrong neighborhood. No phone call, no real explanation, just hours of waiting while the system moved at its own glacial pace. Maya listened to their stories, each one fitting perfectly into the pattern she'd seen throughout her career. But hearing them here, in this cell, made them land differently. These weren't just case files anymore. They were real women with lives and jobs and families waiting anxiously for news. Time crawled by. Maya used it to memorize details, mentally documenting everything she saw and heard. The officers who passed by, their badge numbers, the conversations they had without realizing she could hear them. Every piece would be evidence. Later, at 1:45 a.m., the cell door opened again. "Caldwell," the officer called. "Your lawyer's here." Maya blinked in surprise. She hadn't been able to make a call, so how? The answer waited in the booking area. David Harrison stood there, his usual impeccable suit looking slightly rumpled, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. His dark eyes scanned her quickly, taking in her condition with professional concern. "The courthouse called me," he said quietly as they were led to a consultation room. "Judge Reynolds saw your name come up on the night's booking list and knew something had to be wrong. He called me himself." Maya felt a surge of gratitude for the old judge. They'd worked together on numerous cases, and he must have recognized that her arrest warranted immediate attention. But she also felt a pang of guilt. Her privilege was showing. How many others in that holding cell had no one to notice their names, no one to make calls on their behalf? The consultation room was barely bigger than a closet, with a scarred table bolted to the floor and 2 plastic chairs. A camera in the corner blinked steadily, reminding them they were being watched. "Tell me everything," David said, pulling out a legal pad. His pen hovered over the yellow paper, ready to document every detail. Maya recounted the events of the night, her prosecutor's training helping her provide a clear, chronological account. David's expression darkened as she described the false pretenses for the stop, the excessive force, the denial of her phone call. "We need to let them know who you are," he said when she finished. "This ends the moment they realize they've arrested a federal prosecutor." But Maya was already shaking her head. "No, not yet." She leaned forward, lowering her voice despite knowing they were probably being recorded. "I need to see this through, David. I need to experience exactly what our clients go through. Every delay, every violation, every abuse of power. I need to document it all firsthand." David sat back, studying her face. He'd known Maya for years, had worked with her on countless cases. He recognized the look in her eyes, the same determination she showed when pursuing a particularly important prosecution. "They're going to make this as difficult as possible," he warned. "Elliot Bradshaw is the on-call prosecutor tonight. You know how he operates." Maya did know. Bradshaw was notorious for working with corrupt officers, burying evidence that could hurt police credibility, pushing for maximum charges on minimal evidence. His presence made the situation even more perfect. He was part of the very system she aimed to expose. "Good," she said simply. "Let him show his true colors. Everything they do tonight becomes evidence tomorrow." A knock on the door interrupted them. Officer Langley stuck his head in, his expression smug. "Time's up. Night court judge is ready to see you." David gathered his papers, his movements deliberately slow. "Judge Matthews?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. "Judge Wesson," Langley replied, his smirk widening. Maya and David exchanged glances. Judge Wesson's bias toward law enforcement was well documented, though he'd managed to avoid any formal censure. Another piece falling into place for Maya's larger plan. The journey to the night court was brief but revealing. Maya watched through the transport van's windows as they passed several closer courthouses to reach the one where Judge Wesson presided. The deliberate choice of venue was obvious to anyone who knew the system. The courtroom was nearly empty at this hour. A bored-looking clerk typed quietly at her computer, while a single bailiff stood guard. Judge Wesson sat on the bench in his black robes, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he reviewed the charging documents. Elliot Bradshaw stood at the prosecutor's table, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the fluorescent lighting. He barely glanced at Maya as she was led in, his attention focused on a quiet conversation with Officers Grayson and Langley. "Your Honor," David began as soon as they reached the defense table. "This arrest is completely without merit. My client is a respected—" "Save it for the preliminary hearing," Judge Wesson interrupted, his tone making it clear he had no interest in anything the defense had to say. "We're here to set bail. Mr. Bradshaw?" The prosecutor straightened his tie as he stood. "Your Honor, the defendant was combative during her arrest, showing a clear disrespect for law enforcement. We have concerns about her being a flight risk, given the serious nature of the charges. The state requests bail be set at $50,000. Maya felt David tense beside her at the outrageous amount. Even he hadn't expected them to go this far for a simple traffic stop turned false arrest. "Your Honor, these charges are completely fabricated," David argued. "My client has no criminal record, strong community ties. Bail is set at $50,000, Judge Wesson declared, already reaching for his gavel. Next case. The rapid proceedings had taken less than 5 minutes. Maya watched as Bradshaw shared a satisfied nod with the officers, their coordinated efforts achieving exactly what they'd intended, keeping her in custody until she could be processed into the main jail. As they led her back to the holding Cell. Maya caught snippets of conversation between Bradshaw and Officer Grayson. "Good work tonight," the prosecutor was saying. "We'll make sure this one learns her lesson about challenging authority." Maya allowed herself a small smile as the cell door closed behind her. They had no idea that every word, every action, every abuse of discretion was building a case far bigger than they could imagine. Tasha and Sandra were still in the cell, joined now by two more women with similar stories of minor infractions escalated by police misconduct. Maya settled back onto the metal bench, preparing for a long night. $50,000? Tasha whispered, having overheard the bail amount. "For a traffic stop? That's insane." "It's not about justice," Maya replied softly. "It's about power. They think if they make it hard enough, expensive enough, people will stop fighting back. So we just give up?" Sandra asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion and defeat. Maya looked around the cell at these women, each one a victim of the same corrupt system. "No," she said firmly. "We document everything. We remember every detail, and when the time comes, we tell our stories." The night crawled forward. Maya observed everything: the selective enforcement of rules, the lost paperwork that delayed releases, the casual cruelty of officers who thought no one important was watching. She listened to the stories of her cellmates, each one fitting into the larger pattern of systematic abuse she was building in her mind. Around 3 a.m., a new shift of officers came on duty. Maya noticed how they seamlessly adopted the same practices as their predecessors, suggesting this wasn't just a few bad apples, but an ingrained culture of misconduct. David returned several times throughout the night, each visit revealing new obstacles thrown up by the system: paperwork that mysteriously needed to be refiled, computer systems that conveniently crashed, evidence that couldn't be located. "They're trying to run out the clock," he told her during one visit. "Keep you here through the weekend when everything moves even slower." Maya nodded, unsurprised. "Document everything," she reminded him. "Every delay, every excuse, every name and badge number." As dawn approached, the holding cell had become a temporary community of women sharing similar stories of police harassment and systemic abuse. Maya listened to them all, mentally cataloging the patterns that emerged. The same officers' names kept coming up. The same tactics, the same violations of rights and dignity. Officer Langley appeared at the cell door just as the first hints of daylight were showing through the high windows. "Hope you enjoyed your stay," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Don't worry, we've got a nice cozy cell waiting for you at the main jail." Maya stood slowly, her muscles stiff from hours on the metal bench. She looked at each of her cellmates, memorizing their faces and stories. "Stay strong," she told them quietly. "Justice is coming." As they led her out of the holding cell, Maya caught her reflection in a window. Her tank top was wrinkled, her hair disheveled. The small scrape on her cheek had darkened. She looked exactly like what they wanted to see: another powerless victim of their corrupt system. But they couldn't see past the surface. They couldn't see the federal prosecutor, mentally documenting every violation, building a case that would expose decades of systematic abuse. They couldn't see that their routine harassment had just given her exactly what she needed to bring their whole corrupt system crashing down. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of courtroom 306, casting long shadows across the worn, wooden benches. Maya sat at the defense table beside David Harrison, her posture straight despite her exhaustion. After 3 days in custody, she'd finally been given proper clothes for court: a simple navy blazer and black slacks that David had brought from her office. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Wesson entered, his black robes billowing slightly as he climbed the steps to his bench. The judge's reading glasses caught the light as he settled into his chair, creating a brief glare that masked his expression. Maya studied the gallery behind her as everyone sat down. The morning docket had drawn the usual crowd: worried family members, bored law students, and a handful of police officers waiting to testify in various cases. Officers. Grayson and Langley sat in the front row, their uniforms freshly pressed, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "First case," Judge Wesson announced, shuffling through the papers before him. "State versus Caldwell. Charges are resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and possession of a stolen vehicle. Prosecutor Elliot Bradshaw rose smoothly from his seat, his expensive suit a stark contrast to David's more modest attire. Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed. His voice carried the easy confidence of someone used to having his way in this courtroom. David stood as well, straightening his tie. Defense is ready, Your Honor. However, we have several preliminary motions that need to be addressed before we continue. Judge Wesson's sigh was barely audible, but his annoyance was clear. Proceed, Mr. Harrison, but keep it brief. We have a full docket today. First, Your Honor, we move to suppress the arresting officer's report on the grounds that it contains demonstrably false statements. David held up a thick folder. We have evidence that directly contradicts their version of events. Objection, Your Honor, Bradshaw interrupted, right on cue. The defense is attempting to malign the character of two decorated officers without any substantiation. Maya watched the choreographed dance play out exactly as she'd seen it happen countless times before. Only now she was on the other side of it. Judge Wesson's practiced frown, Bradshaw's righteous indignation, the officers' stoic expressions in the gallery. All of it designed to maintain the illusion of justice while serving only to protect their own. Motion denied, Judge Wesson declared without even looking at the evidence David was trying to present. The officer's report will stand. Next motion. David pressed on, though Maya could sense his growing frustration. We move to dismiss all charges based on lack of probable cause for the initial traffic stop. My client made a complete stop at every intersection, and the officers had no legitimate reason to. That's a matter for trial, Mr. Harrison. Judge Wesson cut him off. The probable cause hearing already established grounds for the arrest. He conveniently failed to mention that the probable cause hearing had consisted of him rubber-stamping the officer's claims without allowing any defense testimony. In the gallery, Maya noticed a young black woman taking careful notes. Something about her seemed familiar, and after a moment, Maya remembered. Sarah Mitchell, a reporter for the city's independent weekly paper. She'd covered police misconduct cases before, though the major papers usually ignored her stories. Your Honor, David tried again, we also move to suppress any evidence obtained after the illegal vehicle search. The officers claim to smell marijuana, but the lab reports show absolutely no trace of any controlled substances in the vehicle or on my client's person. This time, Bradshaw didn't even wait for the judge's response. Your Honor, the officers' experienced judgment in the field cannot be questioned based on after-the-fact laboratory analysis. They acted in good faith based on their training and expertise. Maya had used similar arguments herself in court, but always with actual evidence to back them up. Watching Bradshaw spout legal phrases to cover up clear misconduct made her stomach turn. Motion denied, Judge Wesson declared, his tone suggesting he was already bored with the proceedings. Now, if there's nothing else substantive, we should proceed with Your Honor. David's voice took on an edge Maya hadn't heard before. The defense has video evidence showing the entire encounter, including clear proof that the officers fabricated their probable cause and used excessive force during the arrest. That got everyone's attention. Grayson and Langley shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while Bradshaw's head snapped up from his papers. Even Judge Wesson seemed momentarily thrown off his script. What video evidence? Bradshaw demanded. Nothing was submitted during discovery, because your office lost our initial evidence submission, David replied coolly. Fortunately, we maintained backup copies, multiple copies in fact, stored in secure locations. Maya watched the silent communication happening across the courtroom. The quick glances between Bradshaw and the officers, the subtle shake of Judge Wesson's head, the way the bailiff suddenly seemed very interested in the proceedings. Any video evidence would need to be authenticated, Judge Wesson said carefully. Chain of custody established, proper procedures followed. We'll need to schedule a separate hearing to review the admissibility of this alleged evidence. Of course. Your Honor, David responded. We welcome a thorough examination of the evidence. In fact, we insist on it. And while we're at it, we'd like to examine the departmental records of Officers Grayson and Langley, particularly their history of traffic stops involving minority drivers. Bradshaw was on his feet instantly. Absolutely not, Your Honor. Personnel. Records are confidential, and this is clearly a fishing expedition meant to distract from the charges at hand. Maya could practically see the gears turning in Judge Wesson's head as he weighed his options. This wasn't following the usual script, where defendants took plea deals rather than fight against the combined weight of police testimony and judicial bias. "We'll schedule a motion hearing for next week to address these evidentiary issues," the judge finally declared. "In the meantime, these charges are serious, and the defendant has shown a troubling lack of respect for law enforcement. Bail will remain at $50,000. David didn't miss a beat. "Your Honor, my client has no criminal record, strong community ties, and these charges are clearly retaliatory. The bail amount is punitive and bail stands, Mr. Harrison." Judge Wesson's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "Next case." As the bailiff led Maya back toward the holding cell, she caught fragments of conversation between Bradshaw and the officers. Their confident demeanor had cracked slightly, replaced by worried whispers about what might be on the video. The holding cell was different from the one at the precinct. Newer, cleaner, but still designed to break the spirit of anyone waiting there. Maya sat on the metal bench, her mind racing through the morning's events, cataloging every violation of procedure, every biased ruling, every moment that proved the system was rigged. David appeared at the cell door an hour later, his expression grim but determined. "They're scrambling," he said quietly. "Bradshaw's already tried to schedule an emergency meeting with the police union's lawyers. They're worried about what we have." "Good," Maya replied. "Let them worry. Let them wonder exactly what was captured on video, what evidence we've gathered, what witnesses might come forward." "Maya," David glanced around before continuing in an even lower voice. "They're going to fight dirty. Bradshaw's already hinting at additional charges, suggesting they found something in your car during the impound inspection. More fabricated evidence?" Maya allowed herself a small smile. "Perfect. Every false charge, every planted piece of evidence, every abuse of power just strengthens our case." Through the small window in the holding cell door, Maya could see other defendants being led to and from the courtroom. Most looked defeated, accepting plea deals rather than fight against a system designed to break them. She thought about Tasha, Sandra, and the other women from the precinct holding cell, wondering how many of them had faced Judge Wesson's bias, Bradshaw's misconduct, the casual cruelty of a system that presumed guilt based on skin color. Sarah Mitchell was in court today, Maya noted. The reporter who covered the Thompson police misconduct case last year. David nodded. "I saw her. She's good, digs deep, isn't afraid to publish what she finds. Want me to talk to her?" "Not yet," Maya decided. "Let her follow the threads, on her own. When the time comes, we'll make sure she has the full story." The afternoon brought another court appearance, this time with a different strategy from the prosecution. Bradshaw had apparently decided that if he couldn't suppress the evidence, he'd try to bury it under procedural delays. "Your Honor," he addressed Judge Wesson. "Given the defense's new allegations, the state requests a continuance to properly review and respond to these claims. We also need time to compile the extensive documentation showing these officers' exemplary service records." Maya noticed how he slipped that last part in, trying to establish the officers' credibility before any actual evidence was presented. It was a trick she'd seen countless prosecutors use, and one she'd sometimes employed herself, though never to cover up misconduct. Judge Wesson readily agreed to the delay, setting a hearing date 3 weeks out. It was another common tactic: wear down defendants with lengthy pretrial detention, pressure them into accepting plea deals just to get out of jail. But Maya wasn't going anywhere. Each delay, each biased ruling, each abusive process was another piece of evidence showing how the system worked, or rather, how it failed to work for those without power and privilege. Back in the holding cell, Maya received an unexpected visitor. Sarah Mitchell had managed to get approved for a jailhouse interview, though Maya suspected she'd had help from someone inside the system who wanted the truth to come out. "Ms. Caldwell," Sarah began, her notebook ready. "I've been reviewing your case and something doesn't add up. 2 experienced officers conduct a traffic stop that violates multiple departmental procedures, then push for maximum charges on minimal evidence. The prosecutor personally handles a routine arrest, and a senior judge takes special interest in setting excessive bail. Why would they go to all this trouble over an alleged traffic violation? Maya studied the young reporter's face, seeing the sharp intelligence behind her professional demeanor. That's an excellent question, Ms. Mitchell, and I think you already have some theories about the answer. Sarah glanced at her notes. I've been investigating officers Grayson and Langley for months. There's a pattern to their arrests. Predominantly, minorities, mostly professionals or people who don't belong in certain neighborhoods. But the complaints never stick because Judge Wesson dismisses them, Maya finished, and Prosecutor Bradshaw ensures no serious investigation ever takes place. The reporter's pen moved quickly across her notebook. You seem very knowledgeable about the legal system, Ms. Caldwell. Maya just smiled. I've had some experience with it. After Sarah left, Maya spent hours reviewing everything in her mind, strengthening her resolve. The system's bias was so deeply ingrained that even now, no one was questioning why a well-dressed, well-spoken black woman would be held on excessive bail for a traffic stop. They were so used to this treatment of minorities that it didn't even register as unusual. David returned late in the afternoon with news from his own investigation. I found 3 other cases from the past month alone. All minority professionals, stopped by Grayson and Langley, all charged with resisting arrest after questioning the stop, all pressured into plea deals by Bradshaw. And all approved by Judge Wesson? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Every single one, David confirmed. It's a perfect system, from their perspective. The officers make the arrests, Bradshaw pushes through the charges, Wesson keeps everything quiet, and the police union makes sure no one looks too closely at the pattern. Maya stood and walked to the small window in her cell door, watching the courthouse staff prepare to end another day of justice being served. They've gotten sloppy, she observed. Too confident in their power. Too sure that no one can touch them. That's why they didn't even bother to check who I was before arresting me. Speaking of which, David hesitated. The U.S. Attorney's Office has noticed your absence. Judge Reynolds can only cover for you for so long. Tell them I'm working on a special investigation, Maya replied, still watching the activity in the hallway. It's not even a lie. As evening approached, Maya was led back to the transport van that would return her to the jail. She caught a glimpse of Officers Grayson and Langley leaving the courthouse, their earlier confidence somewhat diminished. They were starting to realize that something was different about this case, but they hadn't yet figured out what. They thought they were teaching her a lesson about power. Instead, they were about to learn one about justice, real justice, not the twisted version they'd been dispensing from their positions of authority. The system had shown its true face, and soon everyone would see it. The county jail's visitor room hummed with fluorescent lights as Maya sat across from FBI agent Marcus Torres. Through the reinforced glass partition, she could see the concern etched on her old friend's face. 5 days into her detention, Maya had finally decided to make her first strategic move. I need you to look into something for me, Marcus, she said quietly, mindful of the surveillance cameras above them. But this has to stay completely off the books. Torres leaned forward, his tie slightly loosened after a long day at the bureau. Maya, what's going on? Judge Reynolds called me, said, you were working some kind of deep investigation, but this, he gestured at her jail uniform. This seems extreme even for you. Officers Thomas Grayson and Michael Langley, Maya continued, ignoring his concern. I need everything. Their arrest records, complaint histories, financial records, phone logs, especially traffic stops involving minority drivers. Torres's expression shifted from concern to understanding. In 15 years with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, he'd seen enough to recognize the signs of a larger investigation. This isn't just about your arrest, is it? Maya glanced at the guard stationed by the door, then back to Torres. I need to know if there's a pattern, and I need to know who's been helping them cover it up. Judge Wesson and Prosecutor Bradshaw? Torres asked, though it wasn't really a question. The FBI had received complaints about both men before, but nothing had ever stuck. Among others, Maya confirmed. The system's rigged, Marcus. I knew it before, but experiencing it firsthand. She shook her head. It's worse than we thought. Torres pulled out a small notebook, making it look like routine interview notes. Give me 3 days. I'll have something for you. As the guard led her back to her cell, Maya's mind was already racing with possibilities. Torres would find the pattern. He was too good not to. But she needed more than just statistics and records. She needed stories, faces, names of others who'd been through this same nightmare. David arrived later that afternoon, carrying his usual stack of legal papers. But mixed in with the court documents were printouts he'd gathered from public records requests and courthouse files. Found something interesting, he said, spreading the papers on the small table in her cell. Remember Sandra from the holding cell? The nurse they arrested for running a non-existent stop sign? Maya nodded. She'd thought about Sandra and the other women often over the past few days. She wasn't the first medical professional Grayson and Langley targeted. In the past year, they've arrested 6 different healthcare workers, all minorities, all during shift changes, all with similar charges that were later dropped after plea deals. They're targeting people who can't afford to miss work, Maya realized. People who'll take a plea just to keep their jobs. David nodded grimly. And it gets worse. I tracked down some of their past victims. Most were too scared to talk, but a few. He slid several notarized statements across the table. They're willing to testify about what really happened during their arrests. Maya read through the statements, each one filling in another piece of the puzzle. A black architect arrested for suspicious behavior while showing a property to clients. A Hispanic business owner charged with resisting arrest after questioning why he was pulled over. An Indian doctor whose car was impounded on false pretenses, forcing her to miss an emergency surgery. Pattern and practice, Maya murmured, using the legal term for systematic civil rights violations. This isn't just about corrupt officers. This is department policy. That's not all, David continued, lowering his voice. I did some digging into Judge Wesson's finances. He's been making regular deposits to an offshore account, small amounts, under reporting thresholds, but they add up. Maya leaned back, processing this new information. The police union, she said. They're buying protection, keeping friendly judges on the bench, making sure complaints get buried. A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Shift change for the guards. David quickly gathered the papers, but not before Maya had memorized key details from each case. That evening, in the quiet of her cell, Maya began mapping connections in her mind. Officers who targeted successful minorities, prosecutors who buried evidence, judges who rubber-stamped false charges. It wasn't just individual corruption, it was an entire system designed to maintain power through intimidation and abuse. Her thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Sarah Mitchell, the reporter who'd interviewed her in court. The guard who escorted her wasn't one Maya recognized, and she suspected Torres might have pulled some strings to arrange this after-hours visit. I followed up on those cases you hinted about, Sarah said without preamble. Found some interesting patterns in Grayson and Langley's arrest records. They work mostly night shifts, target specific neighborhoods, focus on professional minorities who are alone. Maya nodded encouragingly, but didn't speak. Let the reporter put the pieces together herself. It would make the story stronger. But here's what's really interesting, Sarah continued, flipping through her notebook. Every complaint against them gets routed to the same internal affairs officer, James Sullivan. And Sullivan plays golf every weekend with Judge Wesson at a very exclusive country club neither of them could afford on their salaries. Another piece of the puzzle. Maya filed the information away, adding it to her mental map of corruption. Have you looked into similar patterns with other officers? Sarah's eyes lit up. That's just it. Grayson and Langley train other officers. They run the department's proactive enforcement workshops, teaching their methods to a whole new generation of cops. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about 2 corrupt officers. They were institutionalizing their practices, creating a culture of targeted harassment disguised as legitimate police work. After Sarah left, Maya paced her small cell, thinking through her next moves. She needed more than just evidence of individual crimes. She needed to expose the entire system, show how each piece supported the others in maintaining this machinery of injustice. A new guard appeared at her cell door, Johnson, one of the few she'd come to trust. "Message from your lawyer," he said quietly, slipping her a folded note before continuing his rounds. The note was brief but important. Torres found something big. Meeting tomorrow. Maya slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with fragments of evidence and faces of victims. But when she woke, her mind was clear. The pieces were starting to come together. Torres arrived early the next morning, looking like he hadn't slept at all. This time he chose a visitor room without cameras, another sign that he'd found something significant. "You were right," he said without preamble. "The pattern goes back years. Grayson and Langley have been running this operation since they made detective, but they're just the visible part. The real money flows through a foundation connected to the police union." Maya leaned forward. "Money laundering?" Torres nodded. "The foundation receives donations from wealthy individuals who've had charges dropped or evidence disappear. The money gets distributed through a network of shell companies, eventually ending up in accounts controlled by certain judges, prosecutors, and police officials, including Wesson and Bradshaw, among others." Torres passed her a thin file, careful to keep it below table level. "The foundation also funds special training programs, legal defense funds, even vacation properties used by department brass. It's a complete parallel economy built on corruption and harassment." Maya quickly memorized the key details before returning the file. "How high does it go?" "Police chief knows but looks the other way. Several city council members are involved. Even found connections to the state attorney general's office." Torres ran a hand through his hair. "This is bigger than I thought, Maya. These people have serious protection." "They think they're untouchable," Maya replied. "That's why they've gotten sloppy. They never imagined anyone would be able to connect all the dots." Torres studied her face. "You're going to need help when this breaks. Witness protection, federal marshals." "Not yet," Maya cut him off. "I need one more piece. Something they can't deny or explain away." Back in her cell, Maya began preparing for the next phase. Through David, she arranged for case files to be accidentally left where Sarah Mitchell could find them. Through Torres, she ensured that certain financial records would be flagged for routine audit. Through trusted guards like Johnson, she kept track of who visited Grayson and Langley, noting increased meetings with union lawyers and police brass. The pieces were falling into place, but Maya knew timing would be crucial. Move too soon, and the system would close ranks protecting its own. Wait too long, and evidence might disappear. Witnesses might be pressured into silence. David brought more news that afternoon. Found 3 more victims willing to testify. And get this, one of them managed to record her entire interaction with Grayson and Langley. Shows them planting evidence in her car while waiting for the tow truck. Maya allowed herself a small smile. "Make copies. Lots of copies. Store them in different locations." "Already done," David assured her. Also, Judge Reynolds has been quietly reaching out to other judges, feeling out who might be sympathetic when this breaks. He's found a few who are tired of Wesson's corruption affecting their credibility. Another piece in place. Maya had known Reynolds for years, trusted him to understand what she was doing without needing to be told directly. His quiet support would be crucial when everything came to light. Sarah Mitchell made another appearance, this time with a different angle. "Been looking into that police foundation Torres found," she said, keeping her voice low. "They've been funding special training sessions at luxury resorts. Guess who attended the last 3? Wesson and Bradshaw. Along with half the command staff and several prominent defense attorneys who seemed to win a lot of cases in Wesson's court." Sarah's eyes gleamed with the thrill of uncovering corruption. "The foundation lists these as educational expenses, but the receipts tell a different story. 5-star hotels, expensive restaurants, even casino visits." Maya nodded, adding this to her mental file. The corruption wasn't just about money, it was about belonging, about being part of an exclusive club that operated above the law. That sense of invulnerability was what would ultimately bring them down. As evening approached, Maya received one more visitor, Sandra, the nurse from the holding cell. She'd been released after taking a plea deal, but something about Maya's words had stuck with her. "I kept the hospital security footage," Sandra said, "from the night they arrested me. Shows me leaving work, driving normally, no stop signs anywhere on my route. My supervisor's willing to testify about my schedule, prove I couldn't have been where they claimed." Maya reached through the visitor window to squeeze Sandra's hand. "Thank you. This isn't just about clearing your record anymore. This is about making sure they can't do this to anyone else." After Sandra left, Maya sat in her cell, reviewing everything they'd gathered. Financial records showing corruption, victim testimonies proving pattern and practice, video evidence exposing false arrests, internal documents revealing systematic abuse, and soon, one final piece that would bring it all together. David's last visit of the day brought the news she'd been waiting for. "Langley's getting nervous." His union rep reached out, hinting he might be willing to talk in exchange for immunity. "Not yet," Maya said. "Let him sweat. When the time comes, we'll need his testimony to prove the whole system was corrupt, not just a few bad officers." The sun had set outside her tiny cell window, but Maya felt more energized than ever. Tomorrow would bring her next court appearance, another chance for them to demonstrate their corruption, not knowing that every action just strengthened the case against them. In the darkness, Maya smiled. They thought they were wearing her down, breaking her spirit with jail cells and delayed hearings and procedural obstacles. Instead, they were giving her exactly what she needed: first-hand experience of their corruption, evidence of their crimes, and most importantly, time to build an airtight case against them all. The tension in courtroom 306 was palpable as Judge Wesson called for closing arguments. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Maya sat at the defense table, her posture relaxed despite the gravity of the moment. After a week in custody, everything had led to this. Prosecutor Elliot Bradshaw rose from his seat, adjusting his expensive tie with practiced confidence. He'd spent the morning smugly presenting his case, painting Maya as a belligerent troublemaker who'd endangered public safety by resisting arrest. "Your Honor," Bradshaw began, his voice carrying the smooth assurance of someone who'd never lost in this courtroom. "The state has clearly demonstrated that the defendant not only disrespected the lawful authority of two decorated officers, but actively resisted their attempts to maintain public safety." Maya watched the performance with quiet focus, noting how Officers Grayson and Langley sat straighter in their gallery seats, how Judge Wesson nodded almost imperceptibly at key points in Bradshaw's argument. The choreography was perfect, and perfectly corrupt. "The evidence shows a pattern of non-compliance," Bradshaw continued, gesturing toward Maya. "From her refusal to accept the officer's legitimate traffic stop to her combative attitude during arrest. This type of behavior cannot be tolerated in a civilized society." David Harrison shifted in his chair, ready to present their defense, but Maya placed a gentle hand on his arm. She'd waited for this moment, planned it meticulously. Now, everything was in place. Furthermore, Bradshaw was building to his conclusion. "We ask the court to send a message that challenging law enforcement authority will have serious consequences. Your Honor." Maya's voice cut through the courtroom as she rose slowly to her feet. "Before we proceed, I have something to say." Judge Wesson's face darkened with annoyance. "Ms. Caldwell, you are not permitted to speak. Your attorney—" "I speak not as a defendant," Maya interrupted, her voice taking on the commanding tone she'd used in countless federal prosecutions, "but as an officer of the court who has witnessed enough corruption in this room to merit a federal investigation." The change in the courtroom's atmosphere was immediate. Bradshaw's confident smile faltered. Grayson and Langley exchanged worried glances. Even Judge Wesson's practiced judicial demeanor cracked slightly. "For those who don't know," Maya continued, removing her glasses and straightening to her full height, "my name is Maya Caldwell. I am not just a defendant. I am a United States attorney for the Eastern District." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Sarah Mitchell, sitting in the back row, was scribbling frantically in her notebook. The court reporter's fingers froze over her stenotype machine. Officer Langley's face had gone pale, while Grayson gripped the gallery railing with white-knuckled hands. This is highly irregular. Bradshaw sputtered, looking to Judge Wesson for support. Your Honor, I move to— You'll move nowhere, Mr. Bradshaw. Maya's voice carried the weight of federal authority. Because right now, FBI agents are executing search warrants at your office, Judge Wesson's chambers, and the police department's Internal Affairs Division. As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened. Agent Torres entered, followed by several FBI agents in suits. They positioned themselves strategically around the room, their presence making it clear that the normal power dynamics had shifted dramatically. Over the past week, Maya addressed the stunned courtroom. I have personally experienced and documented systematic civil rights violations, witnessed evidence tampering, and uncovered a criminal conspiracy involving members of law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, and the judiciary. Judge Wesson found his voice, though it lacked its usual authority. Ms. Caldwell, you are out of order. This court will not— This court— Maya cut him off— has been operating as part of a criminal enterprise. Would you like me to detail the deposits made to your offshore accounts by the Police Foundation? Or should we discuss those training sessions at luxury resorts where cases mysteriously got reassigned? The color drained from Wesson's face. In the gallery, several police officers stood and quietly made their way to the exits, only to find FBI agents blocking their path. Officers Grayson and Langley. Maya turned to face her arresting officers. Your dashcam footage from my arrest was very enlightening, as was the audio recording from my phone that captured your entire conversation about targeting, and I quote, another uppity one who needs to learn her place. Langley slumped in his seat, while Grayson looked desperately toward Bradshaw for help, but the prosecutor was frozen, his legal pad forgotten on the table before him. Mr. Bradshaw, Maya continued, her voice carrying just a hint of professional courtesy. I'm particularly interested in discussing the pattern of evidence suppression in cases involving these officers. My office has identified 47 instances where you personally buried evidence of misconduct. The grand jury will find that very interesting. The gallery had grown completely silent, every eye fixed on Maya as she commanded the room. This wasn't just a defendant speaking. This was a federal prosecutor unveiling a case she'd built from the inside. Your Honor, she addressed Wesson with deliberate irony, I move that all charges against me be dismissed. Unless, of course, you'd like to explain to the Judicial Conduct Board why you've been accepting payments to coordinate with specific prosecutors and police officers. Wesson's gavel hand trembled slightly. The power he'd wielded so confidently moments ago had evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of federal prosecution. I have spent the past week experiencing exactly what countless citizens have endured in this courthouse. Maya's voice carried emotion for the first time. Wrongful arrests, fabricated evidence, excessive bail, denial of basic rights, all of it orchestrated by the very people sworn to uphold the law. She turned to address the gallery directly, making eye contact with Sarah Mitchell and the other observers. This stops today. Not just for me, but for every person who has been targeted, harassed, and abused by this corrupt system. Agent Torres stepped forward, holding up a document. We have arrest warrants for Officers Grayson and Langley, Prosecutor Bradshaw, and Judge Wesson. There will be more to come as our investigation continues. The next few minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. FBI agents moved to secure the named individuals. Wesson was led from his bench, his judicial robe seeming to shrink around him. Bradshaw offered no resistance as he was handcuffed, his expensive suit no longer projecting authority. Grayson tried to push past an FBI agent but was quickly subdued. Langley simply sat, head bowed as the cuffs were applied. The same handcuffs they'd used countless times on innocent citizens were now encircling their own wrists. This case, Maya addressed the shocked courtroom one final time, is about more than just one wrongful arrest. It's about a system that has betrayed the public trust, a system that targets citizens based on race and status, a system that protects its own while crushing those it's meant to serve. She gathered her papers slowly, deliberately. Every person wrongfully arrested by these officers will have their cases reviewed. Every conviction tainted by prosecutorial misconduct will be examined. Every judicial decision influenced by corruption will be reconsidered. The morning sun had risen higher, its light now filling the courtroom completely. Maya stood in its beam, no longer a defendant, but a symbol of justice finally being served. "Court is adjourned," she declared, knowing Judge Wesson was in no position to do so himself. The gallery burst into chaos as reporters rushed for the doors, eager to break the story of how a U.S. attorney had exposed corruption by allowing herself to be its victim. David Harrison gathered their materials, a proud smile on his face. "That," he said quietly, "was worth every minute in jail." Maya watched as the FBI led the former pillars of local law enforcement out of the courtroom. Wesson's judicial robe, Bradshaw's designer suit, and the officers' crisp uniforms couldn't hide their true nature anymore. Sarah Mitchell approached, her notebook still open. "This is going to be one hell of a story," she said. "Care to give me an exclusive on how you planned it?" Maya smiled. "The planning wasn't the hard part. The hard part was experiencing what so many others have endured without the power to fight back. But that changes today." Through the courtroom windows, she could see news vans already arriving, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. The story would spread quickly, how a federal prosecutor had gone undercover in plain sight, using her own arrest to expose systemic corruption. But Maya's thoughts were with Sandra, Tasha, and countless others who had faced this corrupt system. Without her resources and authority, their stories would finally be heard. Their justice would finally be served. The old system of power and corruption had crumbled in a single morning. But Maya knew this was just the beginning. Real change would require more than just arrests and indictments. It would require rebuilding the justice system from the ground up, this time with true equality under the law. As she walked out of the courtroom, Maya's heels clicked against the marble floors that had seen so much injustice. But today, those same floors had witnessed the first steps toward real change. The power structure that had seemed untouchable just hours ago lay in ruins, and in its place, the possibility of true justice began to rise. Agent Torres fell into, stepped beside her as they headed for the exit. "Ready to get back to your regular job?" he asked. Maya paused, looking back at the courtroom where she'd just brought down decades of corruption. "This is my regular job, Marcus. Pursuing justice, wherever it leads." Today it just led closer to home than usual. Together they walked into the bright morning light, leaving behind a courthouse forever changed by one woman's decision to experience injustice firsthand in order to expose it to the world. The federal courthouse buzzed with unprecedented activity. As Maya strode through the main entrance, Agent Torres at her side. The morning's events at the county courthouse had triggered a cascade of investigations, arrests, and revelations that sent shockwaves through the entire justice system. Now, just hours later, she prepared to present the full scope of evidence she'd gathered. "Conference room A is secure," Torres reported as they walked. "We've got representatives from Internal Affairs, the State Attorney General's office, and the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division waiting." Maya nodded, her heels clicking purposefully against the marble floor. She'd changed from her court attire into her usual prosecutor's suit, charcoal gray, impeccably tailored, projecting the authority she'd temporarily set aside during her undercover operation. "What's the status on the seized documents?" she asked, though she already knew Torres would have handled it perfectly. "Teams are processing everything now. The Police Foundation's records were particularly interesting." Torres allowed himself a small smile. "They didn't even try to hide the payments. They were that confident nobody would ever look." They reached the conference room doors, where 2 FBI agents stood guard. Inside, the long table was crowded with federal prosecutors, investigators, and civil rights attorneys. The wall-mounted screens displayed evidence logs, financial records, and surveillance photos, while boxes of documents covered every available surface. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya addressed the room, her voice carrying the weight of both authority and experience. "What we're about to discuss represents one of the most extensive corruption schemes ever uncovered in local law enforcement." She nodded to Torres, who began displaying key evidence on the screens. First came the dashboard camera footage from her own arrest, showing Officers Grayson and Langley's unfiltered racism and abuse of power. Then financial records appeared, revealing the complex web of payments between the Police Foundation and Various officials. This morning's arrests were just the beginning, Maya continued. We've identified at least 37 current and former officers involved in systematic civil rights violations, 15 prosecutors who routinely buried evidence of police misconduct, 7 judges who coordinated with law enforcement to ensure convictions. The room erupted in murmurs as the scale of corruption became clear. Maya let them process it for a moment before continuing. But more importantly, we've documented over 500 cases of innocent citizens targeted for harassment and false arrest. Primarily minorities, primarily professionals, all subjected to the same pattern of abuse we exposed today. A senior Justice Department official leaned forward. You're talking about a RICO case? Multiple RICO cases, Maya corrected. The Police Foundation wasn't just covering up misconduct, it was actively coordinating and funding it. Training sessions that taught officers how to fabricate probable cause. Legal seminars that showed prosecutors how to bury exculpatory evidence. Judicial conferences that coordinated case assignments to ensure friendly judges. Torres took over, displaying more evidence on the screens. We've got recorded conversations, financial records, witness statements, and internal documents. The Foundation's chairman, William Parker, kept detailed records of every payment, every favor, every case. They influenced. Maya watched the faces around the table as the evidence mounted. These were experienced prosecutors and investigators, yet even they seemed shocked by the scope of corruption. This goes beyond individual misconduct, she emphasized. This was a systematic effort to use law enforcement as a tool of oppression. They specifically targeted successful minorities, people whose careers and reputations could be damaged by even a false arrest. She gestured to one screen showing a database of arrests. Look at the pattern. Black doctors leaving hospitals after late shifts, Hispanic lawyers working weekend hours, Asian business owners making night deposits, all stopped on fabricated pretexts, all pressured into plea deals to avoid career-ending trials. The Civil Rights Division representative spoke up. How did you get access to their internal database? They gave it to me. Maya allowed herself a small smile. Or rather, they gave it to Sarah Mitchell, the reporter who's been investigating them. Someone in their IT department had a conscience and made sure she got a complete copy. As if on cue, the screens displayed Sarah's latest article, just published online. The headline read, "Federal Prosecutor Exposes Massive Police Corruption from Inside a Jail Cell. Ms. Mitchell has agreed to share all her source material with our investigation," Maya continued, including recordings of Officer Langley bragging about their tactics during what he thought was a friendly interview. Torres distributed thick folders to everyone at the table. We've organized the evidence into categories: financial crimes, civil rights violations, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. Each section includes verified documentation and witness statements. Maya moved to the head of the table, commanding everyone's attention. But the most damning evidence came from Judge Wesson himself. In his arrogance, he kept detailed records of every case he fixed, every defendant he pressured into a plea deal, every piece of evidence he helped suppress. The screen showed excerpts from Wesson's personal files, spreadsheets tracking payments received, notes about which cases needed special handling, even performance evaluations of officers who excelled at targeting minorities. He thought, these records proved his value to the conspiracy, Maya explained. Instead, they provide us with a roadmap of corruption stretching back 15 years. A prosecutor from the State Attorney General's office raised his hand. What about Officer Langley? There are rumors he's willing to cooperate. More than willing, Torres confirmed. After this morning's arrests, he contacted our office through his lawyer. He's ready to detail everything: the training programs, the selection of targets, the coordination with prosecutors and judges. Maya nodded. His testimony will be valuable, but we don't need it. The evidence we've gathered is overwhelming on its own. Langley's cooperation just helps us understand how deep the corruption went. She moved to another screen, this one showing a map of similar patterns in neighboring jurisdictions. And this isn't isolated to one courthouse or police department. The same foundation has been funding similar operations across the state. The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about cleaning up one corrupt department. It was about exposing and dismantling a systemic abuse of power that had destroyed countless lives. I've assigned teams to begin reviewing every case involving these officers, prosecutors, and judges, Maya announced. Every conviction will be examined, every plea deal scrutinized, every victim contacted. Torres added, "We're also tracking the money. The foundation's donations came from some interesting sources, including defendants who mysteriously had charges dropped after making six-figure contributions." Maya clicked to another screen, showing a timeline of their investigation. Over the next few weeks, we'll be executing search warrants on multiple police departments, law firms, and judicial offices. We expect to uncover similar patterns of abuse and corruption. She paused, letting the magnitude of the operation sink in. But our primary focus must be on the victims. Every person wrongfully arrested, every family traumatized, every career damaged. They deserve more than just an overturned conviction. They deserve to see justice done. The Civil Rights Division representative nodded firmly. "We'll commit whatever resources you need. This is exactly the kind of systematic discrimination we're meant to fight." Maya's phone buzzed with an update from David Harrison. She glanced at it quickly. He was already working with a team of public defenders to identify cases that needed immediate review. "One more thing," she addressed the room. "This morning, Officer Grayson tried to destroy evidence in his office, but we were ready for that." She nodded to Torres, who played a video on the main screen. The footage showed Grayson entering his office after the courthouse confrontation, frantically shredding documents and deleting files. What he didn't know was that every keystroke was being recorded, every shredded document had already been copied, and every file he thought he was deleting was being backed up in real time. "We've been monitoring their systems for days," Torres explained. "Every attempt to cover their tracks just gives us more evidence of consciousness of guilt." The next few hours were spent coordinating tasks and assigning responsibilities. Teams were organized to process evidence, interview witnesses, and track financial transactions. Civil rights attorneys began preparing class action lawsuits on behalf of victims. Federal prosecutors started drafting indictments. As the meeting wound down, Maya received another message. This time from Sandra, the nurse she'd met in the holding cell. "Thank you," it read simply, followed by a link to a social media group where victims of police harassment were sharing their stories and finding support. "We've opened a tip line," Torres reported, checking his tablet. "Already received over 200 calls from people reporting similar experiences with these officers and others." Maya nodded, unsurprised. They thought their victims would stay quiet out of fear or shame. Instead, they're finally finding their voices. The afternoon brought a press conference on the courthouse steps. Maya stood before a forest of microphones, cameras flashing as she detailed the corruption they'd uncovered. "Today marks the beginning, not the end," she declared to the assembled media. "We will follow this investigation wherever it leads. We will hold accountable everyone who participated in this corruption, from the officers who made false arrests to the officials who profited from injustice." Sarah Mitchell's hand shot up first during questions. "Ms. Caldwell, did you plan to be arrested, or did Officers Grayson and Langley unknowingly target a federal prosecutor?" "They chose me," Maya replied firmly, "just as they chose hundreds of other successful minorities who they thought they could intimidate and control. The only difference is, I was in a position to fight back and expose their corruption." Another reporter called out, "What about the other victims? The ones who took plea deals to avoid losing their jobs or spending time in jail?" "Every case will be reviewed," Maya assured them. "We've established a special task force to examine all arrests and convictions involving these officers and officials. Anyone who believes they were wrongfully targeted should contact our office." As the questions continued, Maya noticed familiar faces in the crowd. Tasha from the holding cell, now standing proudly with other victims. Hospital staff who'd been targeted during shift changes. Business owners who'd lost money to impound fees and legal costs. All of them watching as the system that had victimized them was finally exposed. Back in her office that evening, Maya reviewed the day's developments with Torres and David. The arrests had already triggered a wave of cooperation from lower-level officials eager to save themselves. 4 more judges have contacted us, Torres reported, all claiming they have evidence of similar corruption in their jurisdictions. David added, and the public defender's office is swamped with calls from people wanting their cases reviewed. They're setting up a special unit just to handle these appeals. Maya nodded, satisfied with the progress but knowing this was just the beginning. What about the police union? Any reaction to Langley's cooperation? They're in damage control mode, Torres replied, trying to paint this as a few bad apples rather than the systematic corruption we've proven. But their own financial records tell a different story. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Mitchell entered holding a thick file. You're going to want to see this, she said, placing the file on Maya's desk. Remember those luxury training sessions the foundation funded? I found photographs. The images showed judges, prosecutors, and police officials at expensive resorts, enjoying lavish meals and entertainment, while supposedly studying law enforcement techniques. In many photos, Judge Wesson could be seen literally handing out envelopes to participants. Perfect, Maya said, adding the photos to their evidence files. This helps establish the personal relationships between all the players, shows how the corruption was coordinated. As night fell over the city, Maya stood at her office window, watching police cars and FBI vehicles moving through the streets below. The old power structure was crumbling, its defenders scrambling to save themselves as decades of corruption came to light. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sandra. Group meeting tomorrow, 20 new members, all with stories to tell. Maya smiled, thinking of all the victims finding their voices, all the lives that would be restored, all the justice that would finally be served. The system had shown its true face during her week in custody, but now that face was being exposed to the world. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more arrests, more evidence of corruption. But tonight, Maya allowed herself to feel the satisfaction of knowing that her risk had paid off. The powerful who had thought themselves untouchable were learning a harsh lesson about real justice. The city lights twinkled below, and somewhere out there, former officers Grayson and Langley sat in cells, much like the ones they'd sent so many innocent people to. Judge Wesson's robes held no power in federal custody. Prosecutor Bradshaw's expensive suit had been replaced with prison orange. Justice, real justice, was finally being served, and this was just the beginning. The news of Prosecutor Elliot Bradshaw's resignation spread through the justice system like wildfire. 24 hours after Maya's revelation in court, his corner office sat empty, his personal items hastily packed into boxes, his career in shambles. The press release cited the usual personal reasons and family time, but everyone knew the truth. Maya stood in the doorway of his abandoned office, taking in the bare walls where legal degrees and awards had hung just yesterday. Agent Torres appeared beside her, tablet in hand. Bradshaw's looking to make a deal, he reported. His lawyer contacted us an hour ago. Says he has detailed records of every case he fixed, every piece of evidence he buried. Of course he does, Maya replied, unsurprised. Men like Bradshaw always keep insurance. Let me guess, he stored it all off-site, away from office servers? Torres nodded. Safe deposit box at First National. We're executing the warrant now. The rapid collapse of Bradshaw's carefully constructed facade was just the beginning. Across the city, other officials were scrambling to save themselves as the investigation expanded. Judge Wesson faced an ethics probe that would end his judicial career, while the police department reeled from multiple suspensions. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David Harrison. Police Chief Matthews just announced his retirement, effective immediately. Another domino falling. Matthews had claimed ignorance of his officers' misconduct, but the evidence suggested otherwise. His sudden retirement was an attempt to avoid the humiliation of being fired, and possibly arrested. The police union's in chaos, Torres added, scrolling through updates. Their president resigned this morning after we found emails linking him directly to the foundation's slush fund. Maya walked to the window, looking out over the city she'd sworn to protect. The morning sun cast long shadows between the buildings, much like the shadow of corruption she was working to expose. What about Langley? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Singing like a canary, Torres confirmed. He's been in interviews since dawn, naming names, providing dates, confirming every pattern we identified. His lawyers pushing hard for a cooperation agreement. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Mitchell stood there, notepad in hand, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "You're going to want to see this," she said, holding up her phone. On the screen was a social media post from Officer Grayson's wife, a lengthy statement distancing herself from her husband's actions and revealing that she'd been secretly documenting his misconduct for years. "She's willing to talk," Sarah added. "Says she has recordings of Grayson discussing their targeting methods with other officers at social gatherings." Maya nodded, adding another piece to the growing puzzle. "Get her statement. Full transcript. Record it if she's willing. And make sure she has protection. There are a lot of desperate people out there right now." The morning's developments were interrupted by an urgent call from the U.S. Attorney's Office. The State Bar Association had convened an emergency session to review cases handled by Bradshaw and other implicated prosecutors. In the courthouse, Maya found a scene of controlled chaos. Lawyers hurried through hallways clutching files, court clerks scrambled to reschedule cases, and shell-shocked officials whispered in corners about who might be next. "All of Bradshaw's current cases are being reassigned," the district attorney informed her, looking haggard. "We're prioritizing cases involving Grayson and Langley's arrests, but there are hundreds to review." Maya had expected this, had planned for it. "I've arranged for additional prosecutors from neighboring districts to help handle the backlog, and the Justice Department is sending a team to assist with case reviews." Back in her office, she met with Sandra and other victims of the corrupt system. They'd formed a support group that was growing by the hour as more people came forward with similar stories. "It's not just about overturning convictions," Sandra explained, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "It's about healing the trauma, rebuilding lives, restoring faith in the system." Maya listened as they shared their stories. Careers derailed, families strained, savings depleted by legal fees and bail payments. Each story strengthened her resolve to see this through to the end. "We've established a victim support fund," she told them. "The assets seized from the police foundation will be used to provide restitution. It won't undo the damage, but it's a start." By midday, the media coverage had gone national. Maya's phone lit up with interview requests from major networks, but she directed them all to her press office. This wasn't about personal publicity. It was about systematic change. "The FBI's forensic accountants found something interesting," Torres reported during their afternoon briefing. "The foundation wasn't just paying judges and prosecutors. They were investing in private prison companies, bail bonds businesses, even law firms that handled appeals. Complete vertical integration of corruption," Maya observed. "They profited from every step of the process, from arrest to incarceration." David arrived with updates from the public defender's office. "We've identified over 200 cases that need immediate review. Most involve defendants who took plea deals under duress. Fast-track them," Maya instructed. "Prioritize cases where people are still in custody or facing professional consequences." The afternoon brought news from the state capitol. The governor had announced a special commission to investigate police misconduct statewide, citing Maya's case as a wake-up call. "They're trying to get ahead of the story," Torres noted cynically. "Internal affairs departments across the state are suddenly very interested in complaints they've been ignoring for years." Maya allowed herself a small smile. Amazing how quickly things change when people realize they might be held accountable. Sarah Mitchell's latest article dropped online, revealing more details about the Police Foundation's operation. The story included interviews with former officers who confirmed the systematic targeting of minorities and the pressure to meet unofficial quota requirements. "Your case broke the dam," Sarah told Maya during a brief meeting. "People who were afraid to speak up before are coming forward now. I've got former cops, court employees, even judges from other districts wanting to expose similar corruption." The impact rippled through every level of the justice system. Law firms specializing in civil rights cases were flooded with calls. Police reform activists found their message suddenly gaining mainstream attention. Community leaders who had long complained about discriminatory policing were finally being heard. Late afternoon brought another wave of developments. The FBI raid on Judge Wesson's vacation home had uncovered a hidden safe containing records of payments and correspondence with other corrupt officials. He documented everything, Torres marveled, spreading photos across Maya's desk. Meeting dates, payment amounts, which cases needed special handling. His arrogance is our best evidence. Maya studied the documents, recognizing names and connecting. New dots. This goes higher than we thought. Look at these mentions of state officials, regulatory boards, even federal contacts. A call from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division confirmed her suspicions. Similar patterns of corruption were emerging in other jurisdictions, suggesting a nationwide network of police foundations and complicit officials. This isn't just about cleaning up one department or courthouse, Maya told her team during their evening briefing. This is about exposing and dismantling a system of institutionalized racism and corruption. The day's final bombshell came from an unexpected source. Officer Langley's extensive cooperation had led investigators to a storage unit rented under a fake name. Inside, they found years of unofficial police department training materials. These are actual presentations, Torres said, disgust evident in his voice as he showed Maya the files. Teaching officers how to fabricate probable cause, manipulate evidence, pressure suspects into plea deals, all while using coded language to hide the racial targeting. Maya read through the materials, her prosecutor's mind cataloging each violation, each abuse of power. The presentations were professional, detailed, clear evidence that this wasn't just individual corruption, but systematic training in misconduct. Make copies, she instructed. These prove the department's direct involvement in training officers to violate civil rights. This takes us from individual misconduct to institutional conspiracy. As evening fell, Maya met with Sandra and other community leaders to discuss long-term reforms. The conversation went beyond just prosecuting corrupt officials to addressing the systemic issues that allowed such corruption to flourish. We need civilian oversight boards with real power, Sandra argued. Independent review of complaints, transparent disciplinary procedures, community input on police policies. Maya agreed, making notes for future recommendations. The Foundation's assets will be seized, but we should push to have them redirected to community programs and victim support services. The day's final meeting was with Agent Torres and the FBI's task force leaders. They gathered in Maya's office, surrounded by evidence boxes and case files, to plan the next phase of their investigation. Langley's cooperation opened new avenues, Torres reported. We've identified similar operations in at least 3 neighboring states. Same pattern. Police foundations funding corrupt activities, targeting minorities, coordinating with prosecutors and judges. Maya studied the map they'd created, showing connections between various police departments, judicial districts, and private interests. The web of corruption stretched far beyond their initial investigation. We'll need to coordinate with other U.S. attorney offices, she decided. Set up joint task forces, share resources and information. This is bigger than just our jurisdiction now. As the meeting wound down, Maya received one more update. Judge Wesson had agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Like Bradshaw and Langley, he was scrambling to save himself as the system he'd helped corrupt began to crumble. His testimony could help us expose corruption in other jurisdictions, Torres noted. But do we trust him to tell the truth? We don't need to trust him, Maya replied. We have the evidence. His testimony just helps us understand how deep the corruption went and who else was involved. The night settled over the city as Maya finally prepared to leave her office. Through her window she could see lights on in other buildings, investigators working late, journalists filing stories, lawyers preparing cases. The machinery of justice was working overtime to address decades of corruption. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sandra. 20 more people came to tonight's support group. They're finally feeling heard. Maya smiled, remembering her own time in custody, how she'd promised those women that justice would come. It wasn't just about prosecuting corrupt officials anymore. It was about healing communities, restoring faith in the system, and ensuring this kind of abuse couldn't happen again. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more arrests, more evidence of how deep the corruption went. But tonight, Maya could take satisfaction in knowing that the system she'd exposed from the inside was finally being dismantled, piece by corrupt piece. The city stretched out below her window, its lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there, former officers Grayson and Langley sat in federal custody, their badges and power stripped away. Judge Wesson's chambers were sealed with evidence tape. Prosecutor Bradshaw's career was in ruins, but more importantly, hundreds of victims were finally seeing justice. Their stories were being heard, their wrongful convictions reviewed, their lives slowly being rebuilt. Maya gathered her things, ready to head home for a few hours of rest before another day of fighting corruption. The justice system she'd devoted, her life to, had shown its worst face during her week in custody. Now she was showing it what real justice looked like. As she left the building, she passed the empty offices of fallen officials and the busy rooms of investigators building cases against them. The old power structure was crumbling, but from its ruins, something better would rise. A justice system that truly served all citizens equally. 1 month after Maya's revelation in court, the landscape of local law enforcement had transformed completely. The morning sun streamed through her office window as she reviewed the latest progress reports. On her desk, a framed photo showed her with Sandra, Tasha, and other survivors at the opening of their new advocacy center. Agent Torres entered, carrying fresh coffee and a thick folder. The police department's oversight committee just approved the new reforms: independent review board, mandatory body cameras, civilian input on training and policies. Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. Amazing what happens when you replace corrupt leadership with people who actually care about justice. The changes had come swiftly after the initial arrests. With the police chief's retirement and multiple command staff suspensions, the department had been rebuilt from the ground up. The new chief, Sharon Williams, was a respected reformer with a track record of community engagement. Latest numbers from the Case Review Task Force, Torres continued, opening his folder. 342 convictions overturned so far. Another 500 cases under review. The Public Defender's Office says they're finding new problematic cases every day. David Harrison appeared in the doorway, his usual energy tempered by exhaustion from weeks of non-stop work. The State Bar just announced their findings. 17 prosecutors disbarred, including Bradshaw. 43 others facing disciplinary action. Sarah Mitchell arrived next, tablet in hand. The governor just signed the Police Accountability Act, mandatory reporting of misconduct, whistleblower protections, independent prosecutors for officer-involved incidents. The scale of change became clearer as they reviewed updates from various teams. The FBI's investigation had expanded to 3 neighboring states, uncovering similar patterns of corruption. Other jurisdictions were proactively examining their own departments, afraid of being the next scandal. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Tasha, one of her former cellmates who now worked with the Advocacy Center. New support group starting today. Focus on rebuilding careers after wrongful arrests. 20 people already signed up. These small victories meant as much to Maya as the high-profile arrests and policy changes. Each person rebuilding their life, each community regaining trust in law enforcement. Each step toward real justice mattered. The afternoon brought a meeting with Chief Williams and the new police command staff. The department's transformation was visible even in small details. More diverse leadership, community representatives included in decision-making, transparent disciplinary procedures. We're completely restructuring our training programs, Williams explained. Every officer will be retrained on constitutional rights, implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and we're bringing in civil rights attorneys to teach the legal components. The changes weren't limited to local law enforcement. The state legislature had convened a special session to address systemic corruption. New laws were being drafted, oversight mechanisms strengthened, funding priorities shifted toward community programs. Sandra arrived for their daily briefing, still in her hospital scrubs. We're getting calls from other cities. People want to know how to set up similar programs, how to push for reforms in their communities. Total assets seized now exceed $50 million, Torres reported. All of it will go to victim restitution and community programs once the appeals are exhausted. The day's final meeting brought together the full task force: prosecutors, investigators, civil rights attorneys, and community representatives. The room was crowded with people who'd worked tirelessly to expose and dismantle the corrupt system. Update. On prosecutions, Maya began. 43 indictments so far, including former officers, prosecutors, and judicial officials. 100% conviction rate on cases that have gone to trial. David shared updates from the case review process. We're not just overturning convictions, we're helping people expunge records, restore licenses, rebuild careers. The State Bar Association is fast-tracking reinstatement for lawyers who lost their licenses due to false arrests. Sandra reported on the Advocacy Center's work. Support groups are at capacity. We're training new facilitators to handle the demand. People aren't just sharing stories anymore. They're getting involved in reform efforts, speaking at community meetings, pushing for policy changes. But our biggest impact might be cultural, Sarah observed. People who were afraid to report misconduct are coming forward. Officers who opposed corrupt practices feel empowered to speak up. Communities that distrusted law enforcement are engaging in dialogue. As the meeting wound down, Maya received one more piece of news. The Justice Department had created a special task force to investigate police foundations nationwide, using their case as a model. They're calling it the Caldwell Initiative, Torres told her, focusing on systemic corruption and civil rights violations hidden behind seemingly legitimate organizations. The sun was setting as Maya stood at her office window, looking out over the city she'd helped transform. In just 1 month, so much had changed. Corrupt officials removed, victims vindicated, reforms implemented. Her phone buzzed with another message from Tasha. Just heard from another victim of Grayson, and Langley wants to tell her story at tomorrow's support group. Another reminder that behind all the policy changes and legal reforms were real people whose lives had been impacted by corruption. Each story mattered, each voice contributed to the push for lasting change. The Advocacy Center was crowded when Maya arrived that evening, filled with people sharing stories, offering support, planning next steps. She saw familiar faces, victims she'd met in custody, officers who'd helped expose corruption, community leaders pushing for reform. This is the real victory, Sandra said quietly, watching people who'd once been victims becoming advocates for change. Not just punishing corrupt officials, but building something better. Maya nodded, thinking of all the lives touched by their work, the wrongfully convicted now free, the careers being rebuilt, the communities regaining trust in law enforcement, the officers learning to serve with integrity. Tomorrow would bring more challenges: Langley's sentencing, new cases to review, reforms to implement. The investigation would continue expanding, uncovering corruption in other jurisdictions. The Advocacy Center would keep growing, helping more victims become survivors. But tonight, Maya could see the impact of that fateful decision to remain silent about her identity during arrest. Her week in custody had exposed corruption that might otherwise have remained hidden. Her willingness to experience injustice had helped create real change. As she listened to people sharing their stories, Maya remembered what she'd told her cellmates that first night. Justice is coming. She hadn't known then exactly how true those words would prove to be. The system that had seemed untouchable was being dismantled and rebuilt. The power structure that had protected corruption was being replaced with transparency and accountability. The victims who had been silenced were finding their voices. This was what real justice looked like. Not just punishing wrongdoing, but transforming the system that allowed it to flourish. Not just overturning wrongful convictions, but preventing future injustices. Not just removing corrupt officials, but building institutions worthy of public trust. As the meeting began, Maya took her seat among the others, not as a federal prosecutor, but as one more person committed to fighting for real justice. The work would continue, the changes would expand, the movement would grow. And somewhere in the city, in a federal detention center, former officers Grayson and Langley were learning what real justice felt like from the other side of the cell door. Their corrupt system had been exposed and dismantled, their power stripped away, their victims vindicated. The night deepened outside the Advocacy Center's windows, but inside, the work of change continued. Story by story, reform by reform, step by step, they were building something new from the ruins of corruption. Real justice was finally taking root. What would you sacrifice to expose the truth? How far would you go to tear down a system built on decades of injustice? Maya Caldwell chose to become a victim to expose the villains, reminding us that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption is the willingness to experience it firsthand. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge the way we see justice, power, and the courage to stand against corruption. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter.